Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Kane, and I'm the Marketing Manager for Wonderware NorCal. Thank you for attending our webinar today, Cybersecurity Best Practices. After the webinar this morning, we will be doing a short Q&A. Please type any questions or comments into the Q&A box, the chat box, or email us at webinar@norcal.wonderware.com. Now I'd like to introduce your presenters for today's webinar. Your first presenter will be Wonderware NorCal's Product Specialist, Mike Lapitan, and your second presenter will be Tim Johnson, the Global Principal Cybersecurity Consultant from Schneider Electric. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike. Good morning, Mike.
Hi, good morning, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Cybersecurity Best Practices webinar. We've got a great webinar today, and really looking forward to introducing you to Tim Johnson, who's a great technical resource from the cybersecurity team at Schneider Electric. So I'm going to present for about 10 minutes, just doing a brief overview of Wonderware in the marketplace today and some of the cybersecurity solutions that we offer, and then I'll turn it over to Tim Johnson, and he'll be talking about best practices for securing industrial control systems. So Wonderware today is the global market leader for industrial automation software, and we are used in 1/3 of the world's plants and facilities. Been around since 1987. We are now owned by Schneider Electric, another global automation company, and Wonderware is the lowest risk SCADA solution with the best track record for preservation of investment and tremendous amount of resources for support, and very scalable, allowing you to start small and grow over time and add functional capability as the business requires. Wonderware NorCal has been your local resource since 1992, and we provide local training, technical support, and ongoing education, as well as system consulting and sales, and we have a large system integrator partner community local to you to help you with projects. That's a picture of Daniel Nicholas. I'm sure some of you folks have worked with Daniel, and again, we have a great local support team as the first line of defense for answering all your Wonderware technical questions to make sure you get your projects moving in the right direction. So I wanted to talk briefly about some of the Wonderware product solutions that we have that relate to cybersecurity, one of them being InTouch Access Anywhere. So InTouch is our HMI, human machine interface software for monitoring and controlling your plant. And what InTouch Access Anywhere does is provides a secure remote access solution for accessing your SCADA system remotely. So for those folks that need to monitor their plant performance and efficiency and security and reliability and health of the plant, who need that information on the go, whether that be on an iPad or an Android, a mobile phone, or even from a laptop or a desktop computer, wherever you are, if you need access to your SCADA system, InTouch Access Anywhere provides a secure solution to access InTouch through a web browser, so that being Safari, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, and it provides a very easy way to access your SCADA system. But what's really neat is the security behind InTouch Access Anywhere. It gives you a secure gateway to place in a DMZ, which stands for Demilitarized Zone, and it's an IT best practice for really securing the access to your SCADA system by placing the secure gateway off of the SCADA control network. And basically it acts as a gateway. So it's when somebody wants to access InTouch, they use their Windows credentials to do that against a web page, which is the InTouch Access Anywhere secure gateway. And I'm going to show you a demo of this. But basically, the DMZ sits outside of the SCADA control network, and when people want to access the SCADA system, they go to a web page, which is in the DMZ. Once they authenticate with their Windows credentials, it then actually launches InTouch running on a Windows terminal server on the SCADA control network. So let's just take a quick look at what that looks like from an operator standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to a web page. I'm going to go to my InTouch Access Anywhere web page here. And this is a public web page. You can actually go to it if you'd like. And I'm going to enter my username and password, and I'm going to specify the InTouch application I want to launch. And this is the web page that's in the DMZ. Okay, so it's off of the SCADA control network. Once I authenticate, it's actually going to launch InTouch, which is running on my SCADA network. So from an operator standpoint, they don't have to understand any of the security that's happening behind the scenes. And now I've actually got full InTouch running, and I can see some of my dashboards here, and I can drill down into my HMI, and I can see what's going on. If I want, I can even take control of the plant. If I want to typically provide a second level of login into my Wonderware application to actually take something out of read-only mode and put it into a manual mode. I can actually have control of the plant if I want to, or I can just make it a read-only type application. Here I've got an OEE dashboard, but I can see my alarms. If I wanted to embed my trending, I could have trending embedded in it. This is full InTouch, okay, without compromise. So it's full InTouch running within a web browser. So again, I can access this from any device, being a mobile device, a laptop, a desktop client. It does not matter. We do also have, I was going to talk about a couple of best practices documents that are available to you, and these are publicly available documents, but we just wanted to share that these are some of the current best practices guides for securing industrial control systems that Tim shared with us. One of them being the Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. You can see this is a very current document. And then there's another one for securing industrial control systems and securing industrial control system security. So if anybody would like copies of these documents, we're happy to send these to you or send you a download link. Just go ahead and feel free to request them in the chat panel, and we'll get those out to you. Another cybersecurity solution we have is our Enterprise Historian solution. So people don't just need access to their HMI. That's typically going to be operators and supervisors that are responsible for running the plant in real time. But for those folks who are responsible for actually looking at the analytics of the plant, making sure that they've got the reporting from a production reporting standpoint, from a regulatory compliance standpoint, people need access to historical data. And the secure way to give people access to that historical data is by replicating the historian data that's on the SCADA control network to an enterprise Tier 2 historian, again in a DMZ, that same concept that we used in the InTouch Access Anywhere secure gateway. You can place a Tier 2 historian in a DMZ. Again, it's a best practice. It doesn't have to be in a DMZ, but from a cybersecurity best practice, that is something that is recommended. And now anybody on the business network can access that historian data, typically with Historian Client, which has our Excel add-in and our trending interface for doing historical trending analysis. We have our Dream reporting solution, which is a very nice solution for helping folks create reports, automate reports, not just from the Wonderware Historian, but also from other third-party reporting sources and databases. And then, of course, we support Microsoft SQL reporting services as well, being that the Wonderware Historian is a Microsoft SQL Server front end. So our Enterprise Tier 2 Historian is a great cybersecurity solution for giving anybody in the organization or even outside of your organization secure access to your historical plant data. So again, that's just going to be read-only data that people use for reporting purposes, not to actually control the plant. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to Tim Johnson. He's the global system consultant for the cybersecurity team from Schneider Electric. Tim?
Great, thanks, Mike. Tim, I'm passing the presenter role over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Oh. My name is Tim Johnson.
We can see your screens just fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tim Johnson. As I mentioned, I'm a global principal consultant for the critical infrastructure and security practice for Schneider Electric. So with that, I'd like to introduce a few things, and with that, our team in North America. So the practice has been around for a little over 10 years now, and we've been specializing in what we like to call operation technology solutions. And operation technology for us is the technology of getting anything basically from your control networks or your process automation, SCADA networks, all the different names we call them, up and interconnected to the business network. Along with that is also the things that were just discussed as far as some of these new technologies and things that are coming out. How do you get those implemented into your SCADA network or your SCADA implementation without affecting your overall security with that? And those are the things that our groups have been doing for the past 10 years. We've worked in various industries all the way across from oil and water, water, wastewater, oil and gas, refining, and a lot of energy sector as well, and with our experience with this. As you can see here, the reason we have this picture up is not necessarily to show our pretty faces off to everyone, but to show that this is a living, breathing team that's out there. As I mentioned, this team's been in existence for a little over 10 years now, and so the things that we discuss and technologies and things we implement have been out in the field for that time as well. So these aren't new things that we're trying to bring to market just because cybersecurity is a hot topic right now. And so some of you might be asking, you know, why is security for industrial control systems a hot topic right now? And kind of let me back up for a second. You know, we're kind of using the term industrial control systems as a catch-all. That can be anything from a pure SCADA play, PLCs, distributed control systems, any of those. So it kind of encompasses that whole area with that. And so as we go through this, like I said, when I say industrial control systems, kind of let it flow into what this could be, because, you know, there's a lot of knowledge will vary with this. And another thing I will bring up while we're kind of talking about that right now is we've started with the purchase, with the integration with Schneider Electric, we're starting to do things with their building management systems and some of their products. And the things that we've seen are these approaches and methodologies and strategies that we've been using for Wonderware and Triconic safety systems and the Foxborough product lines. Those same strategies move over to those, which was a great thing to see that these concepts we've been doing for the last 10 years actually go across multiple products. So again, that ties back into the industrial control system statement I made a moment ago. So as I mentioned, why is it becoming important? Well, as we've all seen, more and more attacks are happening out in the field. You know, starting about 6 to 7 years ago, we started seeing more attacks in the industrial control system space. We're getting a lot more market penetration, a lot more visibility into the world of what's going on with that. You know, what now, leading into that, what we're seeing are actual news events now relating to what we're doing and what we're in. Like I mentioned, I've been with the group almost 7 years now, and the first 2 to 3 years I was with the group, we really saw no attacks, no market, anything about cybersecurity. And cybersecurity really wasn't that big of an issue for the industrial control system market. You know, we still had islanded systems where we were using legacy protocols, things like that. But all of a sudden things started happening, we started getting more attacks, and now all of a sudden it seems like all the time we have attacks popping up all over the place with this. And we're getting more and more announced each month, each week. So now the control systems are out on the market, they're noticed by attackers, and they're being attacked. So what has this led to? Okay, what it's leading to, and this is why probably a lot of you on the call today, is to get an idea of what's going on or some of the concepts that are out there. So what we've actually seen change in the last 5 to 6 years is more compliance requirements. So either regulatory compliance is being pushed down, talked about, especially in SCADA wastewater. You know, there's even rumblings about there might be some compliance or regulatory pushed out to that. We're getting more pressure from the corporate level to do some type of basic security on the systems. The requirements to reduce environmental and financial risk. Again, as in the past, these systems were isolated. No one was really seeing attacks on them, so they were kind of off the grid. Well, now that management has started to see attacks and things, our corporation financial risk, our operation risk parts of the company are saying there's operational risk we got to evaluate and reduce out there. So you're seeing, you know, these things cascade down. The other thing is we're just flat out seeing, you know, a decrease in plant safety from this. So as these attacks can be taken over, or systems, viruses, things introduced, they can actually introduce a risk factor to our plant as far as plant safety that we used to not see in the past. And in fact, like I said, 7 years ago when I started with this role, we actually used to get that as one of the reasons not to do cybersecurity, because, you know, it's like, well, if I do cyber, I have to reboot, I have to do this, patching, and it actually can increase or decrease my plant safety by doing that. So it's almost like that is totally flipped now, and by not looking at some type of cybersecurity, you actually risk the safety of your plant. The other thing is just frankly, as time has gone on, we've started doing more type of interconnectivity between these systems and the business network. Just like you were looking at a moment ago, great solution with the Tier 1, Tier 2 historians. But how do we get those connected securely without decreasing or compromising the security to our SCADA system in our plant? How do we do remote access? You know, like I said, in the past, there really wasn't a lot of thought to this because we're still this mentality of an island proprietary system. So these systems just kind of appeared on the corporate network with that. And along with those lines, and that's something we'll discuss here in a moment, is normally when corporate found out about these interconnections, then it became corporate protecting themselves from the process side of the network, not necessarily protecting process from it. So again, those are all things that we're seeing. And then decreased network performance and increased downtime. So, you know, these are things that as you start to do cybersecurity or evaluate information security, these are positive events from those, because part of your cybersecurity methodology is, you know, disaster recovery, which helps you recover systems in a failure aspect. Or a lot of times as we start to put cybersecurity into a network, we start to identify things that no one realized were there, because we now have the tools and things that weren't ever provided to you in the past to be able to find these things. Because of what we've seen a lot in history was ignoring the infrastructure that carried this new technology for us. It was all about the process, the PLCs, the SCADA, the different user interfaces, those things. It was about that. It wasn't necessarily about these technologies that were carrying them. So you didn't have a lot of the tools and methodologies in place to even troubleshoot some of these foundation things that were carrying a lot of this technology you were using. So this has also led to a change in the market as well. So we've started seeing it from the vendor side, coming from Invensys, now Schneider, and seeing it across a whole multiple set of product lines, because now we're also responsible for multiple business units within Schneider, seeing responsibility that our customers are asking us as vendors. So we're getting more requests on wanting additional security features, such as file integrity checks on updates. That's, you know, kind of another thing that's a recent event, is a vendor's site as far as the updates was compromised, and so when customers were going and downloading updates, they were actually downloading Trojan executables that were putting viruses on the system. So again, our customers are saying, what are you doing to guarantee the safety of your site? What are you doing to guarantee to help provide that we're getting the proper update files? What are you putting into your product to allow us to do cybersecurity? Because frankly, let's look back, you know, as soon as 6 years ago, 7 years ago, it really wasn't much in the product as far as user controls at the operating system level. We maybe had something at the user interface level, but not at the operating system, okay? So there's a lot more being requested, you know, patching, different things, antivirus, whitelisting. There's all these different things coming in that the market's starting to see and asking the vendor. So as a vendor, you know, we owe that to you as a customer to give you those tools so that you have a chance to implement some type of security platform for you at your site. And so this statement I like, it's not so much about the Stuxnet world, and for some of you that might not be familiar with the Stuxnet attack that happened, it happened about several years back, and what it was in the Iranian nuclear facility, they had a virus that was introduced to their centrifuges, and what it did was basically cause the HMIs to report back false values so that the operators thought everything was running in within parameters of the correct parameters, but they were actually doing damage to the centrifuges. And it wasn't just like all of a sudden, bam, it was just a steady attack on them, running them up, running them down, doing things to them so they would fail sooner over time. And so it actually came out that that had been going on for years, and they had just thought they had a quality issue with the centrifuges they were buying, so they were just getting multiples to that. There's a couple of things key to that attack. That was one of that's now kind of become known as one of the more government-sponsored attacks, which has kind of opened the door for other attacks. So you've even probably heard in the news this week about how we've had a major breach, probably they're saying the largest data breach of U.S. government information to date from a foreign government. So it's kind of opened up warfare, a different type of warfare, cyber warfare as it's known. And again, what's that going to lead to? It's going to lead more pressure to you guys that own critical infrastructure, that own this type of infrastructure to do something to secure it. So, but this statement is not so much about the Stuxnet attack as the thing that I like about it is this it changed the way we look at cybersecurity. And it was about that time when this came out is when we started getting calls and requests about doing cybersecurity and adding cybersecurity. And so that's really the thing I point to this is that's when the mentality of this market started to change. It kind of put cybersecurity on the map for industrial control systems and putting some type of security around those. And it also led to this statement, which I think is a nice statement, is it's one thing to say that your system has security vulnerabilities, but it's something entirely different to say the system is insecure. And the reason this is a nice statement is every system out there, every OS out there has security vulnerabilities in it. The thing about it is a lot of systems exist behind the doors because they're not a popular system or there's something out there so they're not getting attacked. But as soon as there's found value in attacking them, then they become attacked, all right? So that gets into we acknowledge there's vulnerabilities and we're going to fix it. We're not going to turn a blind eye to it and just leave it as an insecure product. So that's a statement that we really like with that product right there. So all of that being said, what we're going to do and kind of get into right now is discussing a few things around industrial control systems. And the goal for this particular discussion today is not to specifically talk about technologies or things like that that are used for cybersecurity. The thing that we've found in the past that our customers need and to be successful in this is to put a strategy in place or a methodology in place for what you want to do to secure your network with that. And so what we're going to do is discuss some levels of strategies and things that can be used or things to start thinking about to get you going down the pathway of introducing cybersecurity into your infrastructure or into your process world with that. As you can kind of see from here, this is what our typical customer looks like. They're frustrated. They're getting all these demands of, you know, you need to do cybersecurity, you need to do patching, you need to do this, you need to do that. And there's a lot of frustration in that. How do I do this? How do I go about that? What should I protect? Actually, we don't get to the part of what should be protected a lot of times. There's this concept of overwhelming discouragement because there's so much in the infrastructure that needs to be looked at or identified. So there's just a starting point with that. And as I mentioned, what we're going to kind of do is step through some of the methodologies that we've worked with other customers to kind of help things get started. And this will kind of play into, as we go through this, you'll start to see even like some concepts that were introduced a moment ago by Mike as far as the remote access or the Tier 2 historians. Once you get a few of these, once you get this methodology or strategy under your belt and you're working with it, you can start to plug in additional components to it fairly easily and go forward with this. So let's kind of get into it. So the first thing is you know, what do we need to protect? And so as part of this, we got to go back and look at it. So as the screen a moment ago, as you noticed, we had red screens, we had red circles or boxes around a lot of different things. All right. So the first step is we got to go through and identify what's important to us, what should be protected, because a lot of us have financial resourcing limits. We have staffing limits as far as it, so we don't have infinite budgets. We don't have infinite resources to take care of everything. So, and then on the flip side of that, not everything deserves the same level of protection, all right? So part of the process is sitting down and evaluating what's in your network and what is basically risk-worthy, what is critical. What if I lose this, what's going to keep me from making product, producing energy, filtering water, just pick your thing. So what's critical and what is something that isn't as critical? If this goes away, we can still continue our process and it's not necessarily essential to what we're doing at the moment. Again, that's what gets into identifying what to protect, what is critical, what's your risk, and if you have compliance requirements with them or if you have corporate. So again, sit down and identify what's important, and then we start to put something around that as far as what's needed. So if we kind of go with that and we start to put it in here, so let's say we've gone through and we've identified what we just shown there as our key areas. Now we start to implement network segregation. So we've identified from a moment ago where we were talking about let's identify what's critical. We've identified these two areas as critical. So now the next phase are these two areas that we need to protect. They might not be the same level of criticality, but they need to be protected. So now the next thing is we need the proper network segregation. So again, back to what Mike showed you a little bit earlier, if you remember, we had the Tier 1 historian and the Tier 2 historian. He had the Tier 2 and the DMZ, all right? That's getting into network segregation. We won't want things to sit on the same networks, whereas in the past, you may have had a Tier 2 historian sitting directly on the business network, a Tier 1 historian sitting straight on the process network, and there's a communication path directly from those, in which in today's cyber-conscious control system world is not really the ideal path for a customer to go down. So what we're looking at is creating some type of layered approach, all right? And so that's where we introduce the DMZ for your historian on the Tier 2 historian. So we've got the idea of segmentation now. So from there, we want to put in electronic access points, all right? Because now we've got them segregated, just as we looked at with the Tier 1 and Tier 2 historian example a moment ago. They need to be able to communicate with each other. But we don't want them to have open communication and direct communication on every port. We want to control only the things that are needed, all right? And again, this is kind of where we're moving away from the traditional what used to happen in the industrial control world, process automation, SCADA, those type of products, is basically we used to just open up all the ports or have a full communication path. Now we're trying to limit things so that if we have a compromise in one zone, it doesn't have a direct and full open access path to another zone. So that's where we're introducing electronic access controls with that. So now what we're doing is controlling the entry points, or as we like to call it, the ingress or egress points into our control system, our process automation networks. Another thing that you're going to start to get into is some technical controls. So what we've moved into now are what you would refer to as more of your technical controls, all right? Whereas when we're identifying your network, what's important, the risk analysis, things like that, those are more of your methodologies and establishing your program and what's important. Now, once you identify that, we've got to move into the technical controls. How do we put technical controls in? So that's going to be some of the things we're looking at in this section here. So system hardening. System hardening may be a term a lot of you've heard of and some of you may haven't. Basically, in a short sentence, system hardening is just taking the system and removing all the unneeded items from it, all right? If any of you bought computers from Best Buy, even at Dell for a while, you know, it comes in and it has a ton of extra applications on it that they're trying to market and sell to you. Okay, system hardening goes in and you would take and remove all of those. So even in an industrial control system space, these systems come in with some extra programs or things on them that aren't needed. So again, go through and remove those programs. They run some services, like an example of a service hardening would be almost all of our environments have static IP addresses, and they're hard-coded onto the system. So you really don't need the DHCP client running, which is the Dynamic Host Control Protocol client, which goes out and grabs an IP from a server. So if there's no server to get an IP from, you don't need that service. So let's turn that service off. That's one less attack surface that an attacker would have to compromise your system with. So again, what hardening's ultimate goal to do is lower the attack surface that someone would have to hit a system with. And again, this can be switches, hardware, servers, workstations, SQL servers, any of those type of items. We're wanting to remove extra services. And even some of your PLCs and things in today's world, you know, they're running things on them for example, a lot of them run web servers now so that you don't have, so it's easier to configure. Or maybe your engineering station directly connects to it and configures it so you don't need that web service. Well, what we would do is disable that web service with that. So like I said, a lot of what we're talking about are high-level concepts, and mileage will vary, but what we're wanting you to get kind of wrapped your head around is this concept of it and with this. So after system hardening, we've identified what's important to us. So let's look at that one segment. So that's what's blowing up right now. So that's that one control system network that we were looking at. So this could have our user interfaces, it could have historians on it, engineering workstations, multiple things that are actually supporting what we're doing at the process level for this. So we've already identified network segmentation, we've identified what's important. So now let's start adding in some additional technical controls. So what we're looking at are some of the basics of what a control system in today's secure environment need to have incorporated into them. Like I mentioned a moment ago, before we can get to this, we have to identify what's important and what should be protected so we effectively spend our money and use our resources. Upon that point, we move into technical controls. And almost everything we're seeing in requests for proposals, different things now, and from the corporate level, is you've probably even heard it, is they're wanting role-based access controls, or RBACs. And the way we achieve that in a common way is using Microsoft Active Directory. And so what that's ultimately boiling down to, you guys that are owning the systems, is traditionally in the market, all these systems have been treated as a standalone workstation, which means each one is operated and managed separately. Because the operating system was just a means to get the application, the user interface running to do the work for the plant that you're needing to do, or the process that you're performing. It wasn't about the operating system, it was about the user interface and the software you're using for that to control the process. Well, what's happened is these operating systems and these host machines and host networks are an intrusion, or not an intrusion, but an attack vector into the actual process that you're doing. So now what's happening is we're having to back up and secure those and then move forward again. So what we're talking about is using role-based access controls. And role-based access controls means you only give a person enough privilege to do the job that they're required to do. And frankly, in our market across all vectors of it, SCADA, DCS, building management, all of them, have been abuse of users for years. It's kind of been, you know, the concept of user control really wasn't there because we knew everyone and the different things around it, so it really wasn't there. But now what we're needing to do is control who can log into a system, not only at the user interface level, but also at the operating system level. And that's where AD helps us out. The other thing that you're seeing is malicious software prevention being pushed back in there. And what we're actually doing with that is actually going to the next level in what we like to call advanced malware protection. And advanced malware protection has several different elements in it. One of the biggest being is device control. And what that introduces is the ability to control removable media, such as the biggest threat to our network, a thumb drive, a USB drive with that, which frankly, that's how, even in a nuclear environment that was isolated and air-gapped, that's how they got Stuxnet into that, was through a USB drive, and then lack of patching, all right? So if we have a centralized means to control removable media, we're already eliminating one of the biggest threats to our network with this. Now, also, as we move into this, what you're going to start seeing is the concept of centralized management, whereas before, when I was talking about earlier, we usually had standalone systems, standalone workstations. It was more of a decentralized process. So there really wasn't a centralized way to manage users, to manage security on the systems, to manage antivirus, any of those things, because you had to go to each machine to manage those in some form or fashion. Whereas now, what we need to do is, as we go into cybersecurity, we need a way to centrally manage these things. A patching server, again, how can we're trying to make this process as easy as we can, so we've got a patching server that's out there, a lot of different technologies to do that. Again, it really depends on your environment and what you're trying to achieve, upstream, down, you know, how can you get patches in. So there's a lot of different ways to achieve this. And that also gets back into your strategy that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Backups, back to what I mentioned a moment ago. Okay, instead of having maybe we run a backup here or there once in a while, or we do it to a USB drive, we introduced the concept of centralized backups. We can send those back to a centralized server where all the backups reside, and then from there we can do a backup to removable or off-site type media and take that off for disaster recovery. We use the local storage, the local centralized storage for immediate recovery for something that's happening right there. We need to recover a system, a file, something that got corrupted immediately. But in the case of a tragic event, or maybe we lose a building, a fire, something like that, and we need to recover, we have off-site to recover even more with. Again, these are kind of starting to put things together, starting to formalize a plan. One of the last things that we usually talk to customers about, or near last, is a logging server. And what the logging server introduces is there's multiple ones that are out there. As you probably heard of a SIEM, which is basically logging with correlation and intelligence. It's really pretty expensive to implement and maintain. With that, down to a logging solution that's a little bit simpler, which is one of the other. We have multiple logging things that we work with customers to identify what they need, down to just a basic logging server that tells you basic events of such as failed logins, changed usernames, passwords, just events, and they notify you about it with that. So again, it's kind of working with your environment and the strategy of what you're trying to get to determines what you have. And then I hadn't really hit on it too much yet. A lot of these strategies we're talking about, and again, talking about the methodology and strategy that you put together, tie back into resourcing and interaction with corporate. So there's certain things from the corporate layer that make sense to have them monitor and maintain for you, and then there's certain things that make sense for the ICS owners or stakeholders to own and maintain for that. And so it's identifying that good mix for you and what makes sense. And like I said, that varies from site to site and with customer interaction. Another thing, and this gets back to what I was talking about earlier, as far as network performance going up. We introduced several different tools that are actually monitoring switch performance, hard drive performance, memory performance, all these different stats that are running on the infrastructure and the technologies that are hosting these critical infrastructures for you, and can give you alerts and performance alerts in the case that something's starting to struggle. One of the key things that we like for this is, we want something that has historical data on it, right? So that we can pull up and say, okay, this switch port's running 100% utilization, but what's it historically do? Well, maybe it's been running that utilization for several months now, and it's just now that you've got another problem on the network that you're trying to troubleshoot, you see it. So instead of looking at a switch and it has 100% utilization, you're like, oh, that's the problem, and when it's really not, this gives you a tool to track and to go back and help you solve problems a lot faster. As I just mentioned a moment ago, what we're wanting to actually look at here is more of a concept of, as you just noticed a moment ago, if I go back a slide, I just introduced, several servers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 servers, right? A lot of customers don't have the money nor the space to introduce 5 new pieces of hardware. So what we're talking about on this slide is actually taking those servers and putting a concept in of centralized cyber management, all right? And what that means is what we want to do is introduce what we like to call a management server. And the management server is just a concept or a term that we use to kind of, so we all can agree upon a name of something when we're talking about it. And it can be any type of server, hardware, and OS. And what it's going to do is host multiple functions for you. And so, again, we kind of like to equate it to an engineering workstation. And so you can sit down and take care of multiple tasks from this one system. Or, if you tie it into the Access Anywhere product, you can remote into it and do tasks from it as well in a controlled manner. So what we're going to do is basically go through here and take these different services and hardware and move them over to this one server. And now we have a centralized place to go manage the different components of our network, and it's easier to do. As I said, it's very similar to an engineering station. So that's kind of the technical controls for putting things in place to get up and running. Like I said, that kind of quick run through was what the industry is looking for, is basically best practice introduction to putting technical controls into your network. What we're going to look at here is just a little scenario right quick on remote access. So what we're demonstrating here is, again, a couple of things. If you're looking at it, you'll see that we have some access controls in, but we necessarily don't have the right amount of network segregation. So if we have a remote user, they're coming in from this client, maybe through a cloud service to the internet, they're allowed through the corporate firewall. The thing to keep in mind is, and what we're demonstrating through this is network segregation and why it's important, is all these firewalls are doing what they're supposed to do. They're protecting. But what we're doing is coming through here, hitting this web server, this web application server from the corporate LAN that's going through and pulling from the database server that's on our process network on the backside. And so that's what we're demonstrating here. And everything's working. The firewall rules are doing exactly what they're wanting to do, but what it allows us to do is introduce through this, because we don't have the proper amount of network segregation, we're able to introduce a virus into this. And is this easy to do? No. But what we're showing is the concept of hacking and how it works. Because in a hacking environment, or when you're compromising a network, seldom do you get from A to B. You know, if you get that A to B, you've hit a bonanza and you're really happy. Usually it is compromising multiple systems along the way to get to where you're headed. So in this case, we're actually looking at compromising one system, and that's the web server, all right, because everything's performing the way it wants. The remote client can hit the web server is making SQL calls back to the historian, and all the firewalls are seeing the proper calls. So again, I'm looking at two types of attack to get in there. And then once I'm in there, I have an open network to bounce around and do different things with off of this. So what we're going to show now is if we had network segregation, we would introduce some additional electronic access controls. We're going to do our system hardening. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to step through this rather fast, is we put in the same technical controls we had before, user access controls, patching server, and backup. So again, what we've done is applied those same technical controls into this zone. So if you kind of look back to earlier when we identified two zones that were important to us, these are those two zones expanded upon. And so now, and the logging server on here. So now, in order to get to that historian, I would now go through the same firewall, hit the web server, and the web server would go into a Tier 2 historian that's in this area that we just created, which would then make a call which would serve up the data. And so what we would be doing under a Tier 1, Tier 2 type scenario is our historian from within the process network is pushing data up to the Tier 2 historian. So there's really not a direct access to that process network like we had before. So we're basically putting a system out there that if it becomes compromised, doesn't necessarily give a direct threat to our process network. What that kind of does is bring us to about our team and some of the services we offer. As I mentioned, we've been doing cybersecurity for industrial control systems for over 10 years now. We have a lot of different services all the way from planning strategies, assessments, gap analysis, all of those things, all the way into remediation for them. So we can kind of step into multiple scenarios. If you're needing to do planning or resourcing, we can do that. If you've gotten a gap analysis and need some help with remediation, we have portions of the team that do that as well on there. With all of that, that kind of brings me to the end of my portion of it, and I'll pass it back over, or actually, I think Kelly will take it back. I don't have to do any work on this one. And
right. Thank you, Tim. Right. So if you do have any questions, you can type them into either the chat box or the Q&A box. We do have a few questions that have come in. The first one is, what is the first step we need to take to get our cyber project started?
So there's can be multiple steps, but it's kind of a variable question, but in general, the first thing is really just to set up a call, and we can sit down and discuss what's going on with your network or what your requirements are or the problems you're trying to solve. And ultimately where that ends up going is with a gap analysis or a gap assessment for your network so that we can put that plan and strategy in place that I talked about earlier, because the key thing for success on these networks that we've identified over the last 10 years is having a plan and a strategy going in and trying not to do it ad hoc.
Okay, thank you. Another one, we have firewalls in our network and are running antivirus. What else would we need?
So that's a great starting point. The thing that, again, we'd be looking at is kind of a gap analysis and see where you're at. As we just demonstrated, the thing that you would need to look at is expanding on some more technical controls. So do you have the right amount of network segregation in? Are you doing some of these other technical controls such as hardening, antivirus, patching, things like that? So those are great steps, and you're going down the right road and the right path. Now it's just to look at your other technical controls and how you can expand those.
Okay, thank you. Another one, what would the difference be between the firewall into the Zone 2 servers and the firewall between Zone 2 and the actual historian?
Okay, so I think I'm understanding that one. So what we're looking at, and basically what the market has adopted as a best practice and a strategy, is it's really frowned on or really not optimal to have a direct communication from the business network to the process network. And what that means is, in today's secure environment, they want to have some type of stop-off zone, which is that DMZ that we're talking about. The whole purpose of that is another hop for another hop or another point that has to be compromised to get into the process network, so that you don't have a direct path in. So if that corporate machine becomes compromised, then it could possibly open a direct path into the control network. By going to a DMZ host, what you're offering is it's going to serve as the buffer between your process network and the business network. And so what we're looking for is that buffer. Or you'll hear it called a lot of different things. You'll hear it called bastion host, proxy host. There's different things. But ultimately what we're looking for is that intermediate device that can serve as the buffer between the untrusted business network and the trusted process network. And the premise being, too, is, again, we have to open up more firewall ports from the business side to get to that device. So we have a little bit more open access control from that, whereas from that device down to, from the DMZ down to the process network, we can really define granular rules and apply a lot more controls to it. So again, what we're doing is locking down our access. And we can possibly, the other thing is a lot of times in the DMZ or those systems, we can patch them more aggressively. We can put additional cyber controls on them that we can't put on the systems in the process network. So again, it just gives us more options.
Great, thank you. A few more have come in. Is implementation of PLC password security something you recommend?
I mean, yeah, we always recommend as much security that can be supported and maintained. Where you'll kind of see the hesitation in my voice here is I don't recommend that as a mitigation to applying one of the other technical controls. And that's where we see a lot of that's where we see some issues is a lot of times we're looking for that silver bullet, and frankly, when it comes to cybersecurity, there's not any or very few, if any, out there. So again, you want it to have an access control so that people performing that task are authenticated and they are applying the right user level access to that device, or using, if they're allowed to program it, read only, different things. So yes, you want that. But as I mentioned, that doesn't take away from the technical controls above it, because if I compromise that workstation and I compromise the username and password on that workstation, then that PLC assumes I'm that person and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, even though I'm an ill actor. So, like I said, the thing that we usually stress is don't use something that, especially we kind of look at the PLC in that layer of the network, usually is the lowest level. And whereas like we want controls in it, we want a lot more controls above it, because if a hacker gets to that part of the plan, we've almost lost a lot of the battle. So like I said, that's great. Yes, I'd implement it, but I wouldn't use it as a mitigation to any of the other controls.
Okay, thank you. Is data radio a concern with PLC communications?
Data radio?
Yes, that's what it was typed. I don't know if, maybe we'll come back to that one. If you can clarify your question.
Well, I think what they might be talking about, so one thing we see is wireless. I wonder if that's, so wireless communication. So yeah, it can be, again, this is kind of an area, you know, everything you kind of have to, when we're talking about this, kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because I'm making recommendations without knowing environments. But I'm saying in its purest form, what you would want would be a firewall between any wireless access and your PLCs. So typically, again, this is in its purest, and we're all happy and we have unlimited budget world, we would have a firewall on each side of that wireless access point so that if the segment between, if someone attaches to it or gets on that segment, we still have access controls to where they're able to go with it. So yeah, as far as, and we do see that especially in the SCADA market, a lot of wireless being used just because, you know, it's a low bandwidth requirement for a lot of these applications and things. But like I said, traditionally at the core, it's a wireless network running IP protocol. So if I can manage to get on that access point and I don't have an access control on the other side of it, I'm on the network, be it maybe a low connection speed, but I'm there.
Okay, thank you. And I think this is the last one. I have a question about having people view the workspace tech files in Visio inside of our Wonderware BAS. How dangerous is this? I want to store the Visio files on our document viewer to help in troubleshooting with our HVAC crew.
Yeah, so you kind of have, again, it kind of gets on the layout of where it's at, and the thing that you run into just off the top of my head, you know, is the systems are running Visio on, so you're installing Visio, where they install that and how are you patching them and how to maintain the patching on it, and then you might have some intellectual property things to take care of. So, you know, is it a major risk? It's probably, kind of like I said, a lot of what we do, and gets back to this planning portion, is sitting down and applying risk. And part of the risk is, you know, what's the likelihood and what happens if it, you know, what would happen if they did compromise it. So, I mean, if I was, again, in general knowledge terms, I would probably say it's a medium, but I'd probably want to, as far as the likelihood of someone attacking you with that, it's a medium. I would kind of put more as a higher level of, is where the application is being loaded, is there something different we can do to that? Is there, especially with a lot of the things with the market, you can do some published apps. So as I said, there's a lot of things that go around it, but to me, the things that kind of poke, just from not seeing, knowing very much about it, would be, you know, what all systems are Visio getting loaded on, what are your intellectual property risks to it, and where's the files, where are these files out there being stored, and who gets access to them, and looking at some network paths would be things that I would probably be interested in.
Okay. We have a couple more minutes and a couple more questions. So the next one is, can you go over the picture that showed the use of corporate VPN for the remote access to the local resources?
I guess it's this one right here. So basically what we're introducing here, if I may be missing the heart of the question, but really what we're introducing, what we're trying to get to is avoiding the situation to where we don't have a DMZ. Just like I was talking about a moment ago, when you start talking about remote access, and, you know, it's kind of one of those tools earlier, it's like, oh, well, you know, from your phone you can access the plant. As a security person, that's when I start kind of cringing, and it's like, okay, how are we going to secure this? So again, what we're wanting to in today's world is we don't want to have what's up on the screen now, where we don't have a buffer between our remote access. And even if you were looking at this, even from assets on the inside, this is not a good practice because, you know, I have direct access to this web server, and I really don't have a buffer between my control system or my process network LAN right here and what's going on in the outside world. So, you know, that's what we refer to a lot of times as a flat deployment, which is everybody, like I said, this is, there's going to be the majority of everyone out here is going to have this type of deployment. It just comes with the nature of the beast that we've raised over the years. It just hasn't been there. Network segregation is probably the biggest offender of things when we go out to work with customers and look at customers, because these networks have just kind of evolved, and they're kind of what we like to call a field of dreams network. Someone built it and they came. So someone put a switch in at some point and people started plugging into it. That's usually how a lot of these networks get built off of here. So like I said, a lot of times they're flat networks. So segregation and splitting networks up is one of the things we do. Actually, that's the very first thing we do when we work with customers, is splitting up the networks, because what we want is internal or from remote access, we want this buffer zone to be built out right there that I'm showing. And that could be, I'm showing 4 servers, and I didn't really put names to them, but, examples of this would be your Tier 2 historian, your Access Anywhere server, and you would even put those in different DMZs, right? So just don't say, okay, I'm going to put all these in one DMZ. That's why we're kind of showing things in here. So your remote access server would be in a different DMZ than your Tier 1, because you're using them for different things. Now, let's say you had 2 or 3 different types of remote access servers. Those could possibly live in the same zone because they're the same level or the same application type. So again, you kind of want to not stack things on top of each other with it. So that's really what I was demonstrating with this is that this likelihood of this attack from the outside world is possible, but it would be a targeted attack, and as we just demonstrated, those are going on in the world. But to help cover yourself and protect yourself from that is introducing this extra layer of DMZ stuff. And if I kind of come out of this talk about 2 things that we see in the market, is flat networks getting segmented out in multiple layers, and the DMZ of a proxy host, bastion host being applied. Those are 2 of the biggest trends, or the biggest things that customers are moving to secure plants. And actually that's 2 of the bigger things that corporate is asking them to do, is put in that extra layer, a buffer zone between the process network and the business network.
And I think this question is related to what you're discussing now. Is it on Meridian with access control?
Meridian with access control?
Right, that's the question. If we need clarification, Vincent, we can get back to you on this one if we need to clarify that one further.
Yeah, so there's really 2 types of access control that we usually talk about. One is electronic access control, which is a fancy word for firewalls, and those can be host-based firewalls or hardware-based firewalls. And then we have user-based access controls on there. And when it comes to user-based access controls, those usually split out to 2 types, which would be user interface-based and operating system-based on those. And like I said, it really, when you start talking about products and things along those lines, it's a balance act of, how far can I go in locking things down with that. And that kind of gets back to what we've seen as vendors, because, frankly, as vendors, everybody used to write stuff. It's like, well, we'll just make them a local administrator because that's guaranteed to make everything run. So there's really been a push over the last 10 years to stop that practice and actually put to make things run with the least amount of privilege with that. So those are kind of, I may have answered or may not. If we didn't, let us know and we'll send up a follow-up question. But that's kind of the general guidance we would give them around access controls.
And we'll go ahead and make this our last question, since we just have a couple minutes remaining. Since legacy devices weren't really designed with security in mind, do you recommend machines like Tofino to protect them? How about creating an authentication scheme requiring handshaking between the SCADA HMI and the PLCs? So there's 2 separate questions, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of a question we hear a lot about, and I wouldn't get wrapped around the axles too much between the PLC and your user interface, because, like I said, there's a lot of things above that need to be taken care of that could go wrong. If you've got all the technical controls around things and underhand, then it's like, okay, let's address how the user interface or an engineering workstation talks to a PLC with that. Because, like I said, there's network segregation that needs to go in above it with that. So like you said, the one thing that we're actually doing quite a bit with, and McAfee is actually doing this, they have a new product again, what we try to advocate is centrally managed, all right, so that you can manage these devices, and there's pros and cons with central managed as well. But what we're looking at for this conversation is the pro of you don't have to hire a bunch of people necessarily to manage your security for a plant, because we have resourcing issues when we're consulting with you guys that we got to account for. And they have a bump in the wire product. And the nice thing about the bump in the wire product is McAfee has what's called ePolicy Orchestrator. Symantec has it as well, but basically it's a centralized interface where you can manage your scanning, your antivirus update policies, exclusion policies, but it also, with ePolicy, has interface for device control and things like that. But where I'm headed with it is off of that one interface, they have a bump in the wire product, which basically you can set in front of legacy products, and basically it's a firewall. But the trick deal to it is the firewall ties into ePolicy Orchestrator, and so you can manage the rules and things from it. So from that one ePolicy Orchestrator, you could turn on the firewall rules on your user interfaces, on the historians and things like that, so you could actually set up a policy to where they only communicate within each other, and you'll be able to manage it from that one interface. Tofino does the same thing. It's just managed a little bit differently. But yeah, putting a Tofino, like I said, don't necessarily get wrapped around the axle with that, because again, when you put a firewall such as a Tofino or even the bump in the wire in there, you're putting a rule in that says let A talk to PLC B and use these ports. Okay, so if A becomes compromised and starts talking to B, PLC, it's using the proper ports, it's using the proper handshakes. So as far as the firewall is concerned, everything's legit. So again, you have to back it up a layer and say, okay, am I protecting this user interface the best I can with the technical controls in place on it? So it kind of gets back to don't use these other things as a mitigation to not do these other sides of the house. Because really, if you're spending money on some of those things, you might be better off spending money on doing technical controls for patching, antivirus, user access controls, and things like that first, and then spending your money on that access control between the two. Like I said, that's general guidance. You may not have any money, and you may, all you can do is this, and that's the best bang for the buck. But like I said, in a general thing, don't ignore your technical controls for things above, and just to put one between there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Mike. That was a great webinar, very informative. So that wraps up our webinar. This webinar was recorded, and a recording will be available on our website, norcal.wonderware.com, later this afternoon. So if you'd like to share it with colleagues, you can. Also, if you have any additional questions about the webinar, you can email us at webinar@norcal.wonderware.com, and that wraps us up. So thanks, everyone, for attending this morning, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for attending, everyone.